Yeah, that's right. I mean, there were suggestions when Don Farrell came back from China, he was returning empty-handed, but it's only 3 days later, and China's agreed to remove these sanctions on timber. So look, that's really good progress. I think people believe now that China is actually quite serious about removing the rest of these restrictions. Timber's one of the easier ones. China initially said they found pests in our timber, so it's easier for them to reverse that and still save face. So some of the other areas like lobster could be more difficult. But, I think we are actually going to see a removal of all these sanctions maybe by the end of the year.
And it was interesting that there was actually a formal announcement about it. There's been sometimes just a subtle resumption of trade. What did that indicate to you?
Yeah, that's right. Look, that really surprised me because China's never officially acknowledged these sanctions. They are technically illegal in breach of WTO laws. But China sort of did announce this one. They dress it up. They say there's been a review and there's no longer an issue with our products, and that's something they're probably likely to do with barley and wine as well. So they can sort of dress these things up a bit, but they seem to be sort of very open in talking about these sanctions now.
Yeah. You always feel like there's always a trade-off. So what do you think Australia might have had to trade off with China? And perhaps they were part of those discussions with Don Farrell when he went to China recently.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in recent days, China's been calling for sort of fairer treatment for Chinese companies in Australia and Chinese investment in Australia. So there could be some expectations further down the line about Chinese deals getting FIRB approval, things like that. Look, it's still not very clear. I mean, China seems very keen at the moment to be friendly towards Australia again. This comes at a time when relations with the US are very strained. So China would sort of like to divide the US and its allies, which is going to be difficult to do. So look, China's raised concern about AUKUS and other security matters, but on the other hand, it's making overtures to Australia at the moment,
which is a positive sign. It is interesting because you, of course, are in Hiroshima. G7 is being hosted by Japan, and that is a country that is very openly talking about how much pressure it is feeling from China's regional assertiveness.
That's right. Look, Japan's really stepping up to the plate at the moment. It's always sort of had this sort of pacifist stance since World War II. But Prime Minister Kishida, he's doubling defence spending. He's really being firm on the Russia issue, Ukraine issue, and now China. And that's really going to be highlighted here in Hiroshima over the next 3 days at the G7 summit. Japan's going to be really pushing for this unified stance by the G7 nations and their other guests, including Australia, to sort of try and send a strong message to China about deterrence.
Yeah, because, however China may play nicely when they want something in return, its behaviour doesn't always match the way it likes to present itself on the world stage at the moment.
No, that's right. I mean, I think China's a lot of trust has been lost in China for many years now, particularly, with its wolf warrior diplomacy and many of the actions they've taken certainly over the last few years. So, it's going to be very hard for countries like Australia to try and rebuild that trust with China, particularly in terms of our trading relationship. And the reality is the security concerns around China and its territorial ambitions, particularly in relation to Taiwan, are hugely concerning at the moment, and that concern's just increasing. So it's going to be really interesting to see, particularly like a country like Australia balances this sort of really important economic relationship with China, with all the security concerns.
Yeah. Now, the Quad meetings that were, so hoped for in Australia is off, of course. It's going to be hastily convened on the sidelines of G7. How much do you think can really be achieved at a meeting like this now?
Yeah, look, huge disappointment for Australia. The meeting looks like it will still go ahead, but the significance is somewhat watered down when it's just going to be held on the sidelines of the G7 summit, so it's still sort of going to be overshadowed by that. It plays well into China's propaganda that, the Quad grouping isn't really that effective, and America sort of looks weak domestically. But look, it's still going to go ahead. The four leaders will still meet. So it's not completely at a loss. We still don't know when it's going to happen. Even the Prime Minister's office can't tell us yet if it's going to be Saturday or Sunday, but we think it's going to happen before all the leaders fly out on Sunday afternoon.
And with this meeting, what do you think the big challenges are that they are really facing, this G7 plus, of course, Australia at the table too?
Yeah, I mean, on top of the agenda really is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The hope is that the G7 summit can come up with some kind of consensus to bolster, to introduce more effective sanctions against Russia. But this is going to be really difficult because, every country in the G7 grouping has a different idea of how far they're willing to go. And look, this also applies to what actions they can take against China in terms of sort of deterring any future military action by China, because, you've got all of these G7 countries have really important trading relationships with China, and they don't want to jeopardize that as well. So they're going to sort of there's going to be a lot of rhetoric. They're going to send out this sort of strong, unified message, but whether we're going to see any really practical outcomes out of this is still uncertain.
Yeah, such a delicate balancing act really globally at the moment. Great to see you, Mike. Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks very much.